Well, welcome. I think we'll begin, and there might be others joining us momentarily, but so glad to see you all, both from First UU Church and from other, both faith communities and other community partners around Rochester. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. Oh, I wish we were in person at First UU Church following a Wednesday night dinner, as was our practice back 300 years ago before the pandemic began. But so grateful for this way to connect, which might be more accessible for some of you who otherwise wouldn't have been able to connect in this way. So I'm glad for that. And a special thank you to Christina Hamill for joining us and helping lead our forum tonight from Refugee Resettlement with Catholic Charities. But before we begin, I invite you just to take a breath of gratitude for the day. A reminder of how beautiful and precious and sacred each day is, woven finely with the need for change and justice. It's for that beauty and for that community building that we gather here. Just take a breath in whatever tradition, whether for you it's prayer or meditation, a breath of gratitude before we begin. Blessed be. So we are glad. I'll welcome you. For those who don't know me, I'm Luke Stevens-Royer. I'm the minister at First Unitarian Universalist Church here in Rochester. I'm glad to help provide an avenue for this forum to happen, and grateful for Christina for leading, and good to see all your faces. So I'll turn it over to you, Christina, to do a more full introduction and then lead us for our forum tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Luke. My name is Christina Hamill, and I'm with Catholic Charities Refugee Resettlement in southern Minnesota. I will be the first one to put my name in the chat, since I know that my Zoom name is just Refugee Resettlement. So I'll go ahead and put that in there for everybody. And tonight I'm just going to share a little bit about refugee resettlement and what that looks like. Some of you might be familiar with us. Some might have already volunteered in other capacities or just partnered and been generous and helpful to our cause over the last 45 years that we've been in existence. While others, this might be new. So I'm going to start with a little bit of Refugee 101 and then move on to a new program, community sponsorship program, that we've invited congregation, parishes, mosques, synagogues and other faith traditions, as well as not those who maybe just interested in groups who want to help refugees and as we resettle them in this community. And of course, I'll talk a little bit about Afghans, because I know that is definitely in the news and something that's very relevant to the times, and we are welcoming that population. So I'm going to attempt here to share my screen here. Let's see here. Should do what it's supposed to do. And can everybody give me a thumbs up if it's working? Everybody see that? Perfect. I love when things work. So what I'll do is I'll start with a presentation, and then I'll definitely move into a Q&A. So I'm happy to answer questions. But again, I'm just going to start on a baseline so everybody has the same information to start with. So I just like to just point out who a refugee is. So a refugee is a person who has fled their country and cannot return to it due to a well-founded fear, persecution based on their identity or beliefs, their faith, traditions, their political opinions, and whose government is unable or unwilling to protect them. And so that is the definition of a refugee. Unfortunately, there's about 25 million refugees. There's actually about 69 million-ish people who around this world are either within their country suffering or outside their country. But for refugees, they have to be outside their country. And so that's where this 25 million number comes from. And what I always say is for refugee resettlement, it is the stars aligning for a select group of people. And there is no rhyme and reason to that. I do want to state that nobody picks and chooses, but those who are able to complete the process, which I'll touch on today, is less than 1% that ever get to the United States. So it's a very small number. Although I will say that the United States is a leading global leader for people coming to resettle. So we definitely play a role in the global, meeting the global crisis and trying to manage that. But less than 1% that wish to come will ever actually make it here. Now the history, the U.S. has, like, as I mentioned, has a long history of this, starting back with the Displaced Persons Act of 1948, with the Jewish population that was coming in at that time. Then Congress did another act in the 1960s. What we see more formally today in resettlement, and again, I'll talk about the process a bit, is stemming from the 1980 Refugee Act. So that was a very formalized acknowledgement by the US government to say that we want to create a program that will aid those in need around this world to be welcomed and resettled into the United States. And so, although Catholic Charities and most faith-based organizations kind of lead this on a national level, we are monitored and work in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the State Department, as well as the Office for Populations and Refugee Migration. So what that means is we work very closely with the federal government to make sure that there's consistency across the United States in resettlements, and that refugees that qualify and are designated to come to our region to be welcomed by us get the same special care that we take pride in. We also work closely with USCIS, who determines the eligibility of refugees overseas. And I will say I'm kind of flying about 35,000 feet up in the air a bit, so for today's call, but I'm happy to answer any other questions people might have on more specifics in this area. I just, again, go over a little bit of what the process looks like for refugee resettlement. So what happens for a refugee is that a horrible situation has taken place, right? Generally what we see in the news, such as the Iraqis and Syrians and Sudanese, Vietnamese for that matter, what happened is somebody was persecuted and they fled their country. And what they did is they went to another country, which I would disagree with the name they call them, but they call those countries host countries. And often they're in those countries illegally. So the host countries aren't generally happy to host them in all situations, although some countries are to some extent. And what happens in those countries is those refugees might be living in refugee camps, such as Somalis that are in Kenya, or Iraqis and Syrians living in Turkey. And those are what you're kind of familiar with, seeing those tent cities on the news. And what would happen is at that time, the UN is at these locations in these host countries, these camps, and they allow refugees to come to them and state their case. Because technically, although the world, and I myself as a humanitarian, we would call them refugees, they actually have to have the legal definition of that and meet that definition. And so the UN would interview initially the families that are stating that they're refugees and what has happened to them. And that would be the initial step, is if the UN acknowledges that. If they meet that criteria of the UN, then they would start the process of security checks and making sure that what they state as being right and just and clear is what actually happened to them. If they're going down the path of being resettled by the US, then Department of Homeland Security gets involved, and they have about 5 to 7 various background checks, and it's quite an extensive list that they get approval for, and they meet those conditions and criteria of the United States government. What then will happen is that they will be matched with a sponsoring agency. So in other words, Catholic Charities on our side might get the initial information about them that says there's a family of 4 in Turkey, they're Syrian, and they don't know anybody in the United States. And we have decided to designate them to your resettlement agency. And we would look at them and we go, okay, we're happy to welcome them. And we basically ship that big yes back over to the overseas. We have file cabinets full of these cases where we have said big yeses, we're happy to welcome them, we're ready to move forward, but that doesn't mean they'll actually come. There is a second level of security checks that take place. And then after about 18 to 3-year wait, and this is all happening, they'll be admitted to the United States. Now in this, you have this other category where I was talked about these in-person interviews that are happening, these medical screens, these cultural orientations, all these other things are happening. And the reason why, well, to the best of my knowledge, the reason why less than 1% come is because sometimes they get resettled in other countries. Other times the interviews don't go well. They find out that one of the children isn't actually a biological child, but in fact, a adopted child that they picked up off, the side of the road when things happened, and that can set back cases. The medical screenings have to be valid every 6 months. So if you have a family of 8, you can imagine that, medical screenings expire, and then the security clearances expire. And so then you have to go back for the medical, and then the medical gets done, and then the security is, so it's this very complex system. I know that was not the intention of the UN. I know that's not necessarily the intention of the United States, but that's in fact kind of the program that's accepted by the world and those who welcome refugees. So we would be the ones that are ready and willing to meet them at the end of this process at the airport. So I'll get a little bit more into the things that we do, but I do also want to kind of start big picture. So as a resettlement agency, oops, I apologize. I'll go back here one. There's several of us in the state of Minnesota. Catholic Charities is the only one in this region. And we're allowed to operate per the government, the federal government, in a 100-mile radius. So I did the best I could to kind of draw our territory, if you want to say. So this would mean that if there are families that would like to reunite with other family members, we would do that. We call that family reunification. We see that a lot in Austin and Albert Lea. Almost 100% of our cases in Austin and Albert Lea are all family reunification cases. Rochester, we generally resettle both family reunification as well as what we call free cases. And free cases are individuals that don't know anybody in the United States, that they need just a safe place and welcoming community to land in. And so generally because our office is out of Rochester for the refugee resettlement program for Catholic Charities, we would resettle them in Rochester. But of course, there's the International Institute in St. Paul. There's LSS, Lutheran Social Services out of St. Cloud, Minnesota Council of Churches of Minneapolis, and Arrive Ministries out of Richfield. So quite a few in the Twin Cities that also do resettlement in the state of Minnesota. So where do refugees come from when I'm talking more local levels? So we have historically welcomed refugees from Ethiopia, which are the Anuak tribe. They live in an area called Gambela, and that is a region that has seen a lot of strife. And actually, you can see that if you Google Ethiopia now, you'll see that there has been intense fighting happening, not with the Anuak tribe, but the Tigrinya and the Tigrinya tribes happening there. So there's a lot of unrest with the smaller ethnic groups that live there. And the Anuak could sometimes identify as as Sudanese or Ethiopians because their land is kind of this in-between borderland, whereas your culture and your community, your ethnicity isn't defined by borders that have been drawn later on. And so that's one thing with them, is that neither side accepts them, but kind of continues to put a squeeze on them. And this has gone on for decades, unfortunately. Currently, we see a lot more reunification. We see that families reuniting in Rochester, and we see families reuniting in Austin region. You don't see them here in Rochester, but we actually welcome a lot from Myanmar, or what the government likes to call still as Burma. And that's small ethnic minorities called Karen and Karenni. And they, again, are ethnic groups that in Myanmar have been persecuted. You wouldn't see that necessarily as much in the news now. These are situations where it's family reunification, because honestly, who we see now are young to mid 30-year-old couples with children who literally have never seen their home country. So they've never seen Myanmar, they've never seen Burma. They have lived their whole lives in Thailand in refugee camps, and Thailand is trying to close those refugee camps. So they're really trying to get them resettled in a third country, such as the United States. So we see quite a few of those in Austin, Albert Lee. It's almost 50% of our caseload, even though Rochester folks don't know about this, because we're out where the people are. We have received not as many as we anticipated, but we have received several families from the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Congolese. And of course, I think as a community in Rochester, you would all be aware of our Somali and our family reunification with Somalis. We don't see quite as many Somalis as we once did. I think, if you can say this with any confidence, it's winding down a bit more as the initial conflict takes place. But unfortunately, Somalia is still not stable. So what happens is these families still reside in Kenya, and Kenya also loves putting, kind of every once in a while, I think it was 2 years ago, they said, oh, we're closing down one of the world's biggest camps. And so that kind of pushes a lot of pressure on people who don't have anywhere else to go. And then there's the Afghans. So that's a new group for us, of course. This was an unexpected turn of events. I think anybody in the United States could kind of say that what happened about a month ago was unexpected. And so we have definitely, the US and ourselves have definitely come about and made sure that we are ready to welcome them. We have welcomed our first case, a young couple, about a week and a half ago, and we anticipate many more at this point. What I can say is that we anticipate more. How many, I really don't know. As a resettlement site, we have opened up slots of 40 individuals. I like to clarify that, not 40 families, but 40 individuals. And we anticipate this number going up. But the way it works is that we are provided slots. So in working with our nationals and the federal government, they allow sites a certain number of slots for refugee resettlements. And so the Afghans are actually underneath a special program, because I don't know if you guys remember when I mentioned refugees at the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned how they had to be outside their country of origin into those host countries. And as we all see, sadly, with the Afghans, that was not the situation. The ground level security was so bad that they had to literally kind of like evacuate them out of their homeland immediately to the United States, which is not a refugee process. And so therefore, technically, the Afghans are not legal refugees. They're humanitarian parolees. So now what does that mean for us locally? Not much difference. There'll be some immigration things that we have to work with them specifically about that's different than the refugees, but in terms of the services they're eligible for, Congress 2 weeks ago took it upon their hearts and their minds to provide them the same services eligibility as other refugees. So 3 weeks ago, I would have said there's a vast difference between refugees and the Afghans, but now Congress has made that an act and the policy has changed. So Afghans, in our thought process and how we will help them and aid them and what they qualify for, will be exactly like refugees. And I'll definitely take questions on that, because I know that's a hot, that's quite a relevant question. So Catholic Charities Refugee Resettlement is a direct service resettlement. So we provide services for what the government allows us to provide is 90 days. Technically, the government says that we can prepare and resettle refugees in 30 days. We feel pretty strongly that people need at least 3 months to kind of get their lives started here. And so we have accepted the 90 days maximum that the government will allow for resettlement. And so our goals are really establishing a family in our community, providing them with a safe and stable environment, and really encouraging and empowering them, reminding them of their inner strengths so that they can work towards their self-sufficiency. So that, you know, of course, if there's community members that want to be a part of their lives and walk beside them, that is even better, but to remind them that they are strong in and of themselves alongside the others that might walk with them. So I like sharing this chart because it really, in pictures and in words, boils down to kind of what we do, and also how people who wish to help families and maybe be paired through the community sponsorship program that I'll be talking about. You can see the whole picture. You can see our goals of finding housing, securing household items for a family, welcoming them at the airport. And luckily it's the Rochester airport, not the Minneapolis. So that's much easier for anybody who's ever experienced MSP. You know, things like securing cell phones and grocery shopping, and then providing them a nice hot meal when they arrive here into this country, and then showing them their house and what's different than maybe where they came from, and the safety and the how to use the laundry, you know, the machines and those sorts of things, providing them clothes that are seasonally appropriate for our nice winters that are creeping up on us now, visiting them at their home, making sure that things are going well for them. And also for Catholic Charities, our goals is, of course, establishing the benefits that they qualify for. And that would be health insurance, food support, cash assistance programs that they'd be eligible for, at least initially, while they look or while they wait for their employment documents. So then they can start looking for employment. Also, connecting them with English classes at Hawthorne Education. And I know that there's a strong connection for volunteers in this congregation with Hawthorne. So many of you might already know of Hawthorne and their wonderful services. And then also getting the children to their first days of school and orientations with their new teachers and those sorts of things. Volunteers can help us provide initial transportation. Of course, we teach all our families the bus because, again, it's that self-sufficiency part. Maybe they'll get a car in the near future, but most likely it's something that most have never driven before, and that might be a more long-term goal. So we teach them how to do the bus, but then we also take them initially to some of those appointments they might have, just to get them started. We provide orientation classes, you know, cultural norms and budgeting classes and all those things that, you know, will help them get a stronger hold and grasp of their new environment and their new home. And then when people are paired with the families, there'll be just a continuing friendships that bloom and allows for more conversations about what's school like, what's the first job here, building their confidence in who they are and what skills they can bring to the table. So this is resettlement in pictures and words in a nutshell. So unfortunately, the refugee crisis is not going away. It continues to add more numbers, right? Unfortunately, the Afghanistan is the latest of the more recent crises. And, you know, as here, I have received some emails recently from other congregations going, well, what about the Sudanese? And what about, you know, the Syrians? And by no means have we left them behind in our thoughts. And we still welcome those groups. It also does depend on the UN and other nations getting out to these countries again. COVID played a really big part in limiting the ability for a lot of refugees to get where they needed to go for interviews. And a lot of staff was pulled away from these regions because of safety reasons. And so, so resettlement really, because of COVID, was greatly impacted, but now we're seeing that, that kind of go back to, I guess, quote unquote, the normal, where people are able to access interviews and get the process going again. But what I will say is, in this time frame, it has left resettlement agencies such as ours really struggling because of the prior administration's feelings about refugees and others. And so what we find ourselves is in a time of great need, because we need more people who are willing to help and welcome refugees. To be honest with you, we are ramping up our staff. We just hired a new person coming in next week, but we only have 2 full-time case managers. And so we used to have 7, if that kind of puts things in perspective. So I think we are hoping for 2 things. We're hoping that we continue to be able to build to respond to these various crises that are happening around the world, as well as asking the community to also play a role in helping us welcome and coming beside us in this process. And so that leads us to the next thing. And the Biden administration was thinking along these same lines. And so what they have done is they have allowed refugee resettlement to be opened up to the community in a way that it hasn't been before. So they're allowing us to carry out a program called community sponsorship. And what it allows is this idea that in partnership with Catholic Charities Refugee Resettlement, we walk beside and we welcome groups of volunteers, as well as, you know, it could be congregations, parishes, as I said, or just interested groups that would be willing to partner with us. Oops, I'm sorry. And help us welcome refugees, because the more community partners there are to help us with families, the more families we can welcome, right? Because Catholic Charities will definitely play our role like we always have in helping support them with case management. But you want to know, at the end of the day, what saddens us the most is that the things that we really struggle with are the one-on-one interactions of really meaningful. So if any of you have sat down with a relative of a friend and had a great meal together and sat there for 2 hours talking about things, those are things that I can't do. I go into a refugee's house, I do orientations, I have a wonderful experience with them, but I'm not going to be able to sit there and have a casual conversation. I'm not going to be able to have this meaningful community connection. And we really would love groups to come in and be that meaningful connection. And if they have a question about their laundry machine again, you know, there's a second person that would come in and go like, oh, this is how you do it if you remember how to do it. Helping families get cell phones, if the minutes, you know, added to their cell phones. Those are the things that we do and try to do, but that limits our ability to take more families. Whereas if we have people walking beside them and helping with these kind of odd and end needs, it really does allow us to welcome more families. What volunteers would do underneath the community sponsorship model is, as I mentioned, kind of collecting household items potentially for a family. We are currently welcoming traditional refugees, I guess you can say, the refugees that are coming from overseas, as well as the Afghan refugees that are coming out of the military bases. So I'm kind of talking about 2 things, like as I have a picture here of welcoming a family at the airport, that's not going to be the Afghans, but that would be more traditional, I'm calling traditional refugees that would come from overseas. But the Afghans will be coming here from bases, and we'll also have to welcome them and get them into permanent housing. Again, providing maybe some transportation assistance initially. We're going to do the bus orientation, but if anybody wants to come along with us and learn the bus in Rochester, we're happy to do that. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually. I know it's kind of scary for a lot of people, but it's a fun thing to do. And then just really helping them build confidence, as I said, maybe showing them how to pay bills and write their name and their address and some of these basic skills that we start but can be reinforced. So yeah, helping create an inviting home, maybe some transportation, teaching them new skills, and it's skills that all of us possess, right? It's teaching somebody how to do a basic budget. It's grocery shopping. It's helping sort mail, because I can spend hours with the person sorting the mail, what this is trash and this is important. And then also having those fun experiences. I never get to go sledding with my refugees. I would love to take them out and go sledding, because I know that's great. I don't get to, peruse the library with them, go bowling, show them new experiences. I have, a role that I really have to work on their self-sufficiency in a small period of time in a lot of different families. But I would love to have volunteer groups that would be willing to really take on these fun activities, as well as some of these, how do you pay a bill? How does this work? I teach them that, but also reinforcing that message and that thought. So those are what a community sponsorship does. And I love this one picture over here of this is a Syrian family that went sledding. So yeah, it's just those experiences that we would love to have community sponsor volunteers help us with. How to become a community sponsor? So we are asking for a group of about 10 to 15 people, and you might go, oh my gosh, that seems like a lot. But the reason we do that is because that allows many of the tasks or the things that you could be helping with, it's not falling on one person's shoulders. We don't want that. We want this to really be able to be a fun, nice experience for everybody, and that allows for 1 or 2 tasks per volunteer. So the larger the group, it allows to kind of share those things. And if somebody needs to step away for a vacation, no problem. That's okay. Somebody else can step in and help a little bit in certain areas. We are asking for a 6-month commitment. We are going to try very hard in our new model to provide follow-up services for 6 months. Again, I told you the government gives us 3 months, but families being paired, we are committed to these families, and would love to continue to work with the community sponsorship group that's paired with them, as well as the family, so we can get them really solid in the 6-month time. If you decide to move forward with something like this, it's pretty basic to start. It's getting a individual basic information form, literally, that has your name, phone number, and address. It's reading and signing our volunteer code of conduct. There is a background check that would have to take place, and it is $8, but it's not, you're not required to pay the $8, but we do welcome donations in that as number of volunteers go up. There is a protecting children online training that we ask people to please complete. But again, these are things that we can talk more if there's a group of individuals who would like to move forward with this. And then I would say Catholic Charities does the training. I do the training just to, again, answer questions. I'm giving you a really high level, like what we're doing, but I would do training just so people feel confident and like, how do I go from here to here? How do I help a family do this? And I can answer those sorts of questions in that training. So I know I talked really fast and I talked about a lot of things, but I will open it up to anybody who would like to ask questions about all that information.
Christina, we've got a couple of questions that came to me in the chat here that I'll read, and if you want to respond to. The first one was, as part of medical screening, will refugees be meeting CDC criteria, be immunized for COVID, or what's the current kind of practices or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if they're Afghan, they will be. So all Afghans coming out of the military bases will be immunized for COVID. We would love to see it in the refugees, but it's not that the refugees don't want it. What ends up happening is that you have to think in Africa and these other countries, they don't have the access to a lot of these vaccines. So a lot of it is there is not access to it.
Thanks. There's another one asking about the training. If folks have done it before, is that does it need to be renewed every so often? Do they need to do it again? What are practices there?
Yeah, because I did the last training, I think, with this group, and it's been some years. So I would say that we probably should, and things have changed. If we end up pairing this group or some of your group with Afghans, that looks a little different. That's going to be different. And so I'd like to have that opportunity to talk about that.
Great. Two others. One is, I'll read the whole thing. Can you expand on the final phase of continuing ed, etc.? Where do you anticipate that new refugees will be housed? What support do you anticipate? Language, housing, technology, job applications? And if a family is not having success,
Okay, kind of glitched out there but I think I get the main question. So yeah, I mean, again, that would be in the training. And so that's a lot to break down. But what I can say is that housing is looking different than it ever has before. For the Afghans, because they're in the United States and are being evacuated at potentially really high numbers, we're actually housing them temporarily at a hotel with kitchenettes. Because with the Afghans, they're stating that they may actually have family they want to still reunite with. And so we're not exactly sure if they're being designated to us as their final spot per their wish, or if they're being designated us to because they need to get off the bases. And then we're another landing spot potentially for them to go to where they really want to go. And that's something we're just not sure about. So we're doing this kind of temporary housing option so that nobody gets tied into a lease that they really don't want to be in. Refugees, it's different. We're always looking for permanent housing as soon as possible upon arrival. And then they qualify for medical insurance, food stamps or food supports, cash assistance. But to be honest with you, there is no one program that will ever support a family, whether they're refugee or US born. And so it comes down to employment. And so when I talk about all these things, I'm never saying, oh, the sponsorship group is going to do all this. I'm saying the case manager and the sponsorship group are going to work together, meet a family, learn about a family, partner with a family, and figure out what's the best way that they can succeed. Whether that's a community sponsorship going, hey, I know a place my friend Bob works at that might be a good fit, or it's me going, hey, do you want to take them down to Textile Care Services and seeing if there's a good spot for them at that place. So it's definitely a partnership in this and no one person solely responsible.
Thank you. That kind of answered most of the next question, wondering about the process for housing. Also saying they know someone who wants to donate very nice furniture, wondering about donations are needed and when. I know that some of that is probably on a case-by-case basis, I'm assuming as well.
Yeah, we do take donations, and we have. What I will say is once the Afghan situation hit the news, we got a huge slew of in-kind, so furniture donations. So currently we're not taking a lot of them. You can still call Catholic Charities of Southern Minnesota, and we'll see if it's something we can take at that time. But please don't be offended. We just had so many try to give that we kind of got inundated by some of the, particularly the furniture items.
Great. There's another question I'll get to in just a second, kind of as a closing. And then someone asked, how long would the training take? I don't remember if that was in your slide or not, what all that entails.
Yep. So what I'm telling people is it's about a 3-hour. And the reason I say 3-hour, it can be less, is that I would come and talk to the group. This could be a leader, because what this group is I would like the group to formulate a leadership. So maybe 1 or 2 people that are kind of leading, or the contact person, and those contact people are kind of interacting with me. And so compiling that paperwork and everything together. So it's solidifying the group. And then I would set up a training with that leader and anybody else who's able to come to that. So that leader has that knowledge in their back pocket to kind of come out. And so I felt like talking with other leaders that about 3 hours was a good fit, because there was enough time for me to like go over the stuff, but also Q&A. I wanted to make sure people felt comfortable. It could be less. It depends on the actual training. I don't have a format that it will be 3 hours.
For sure. Thank you. Um, so the last, one of the last questions in the chat so far, and we'll end right at 7:15 because I know some folks have some meetings to get to. I know Christina has some obligations as well. One question was, how will the UU Church make kind of a final decision to become a sponsor? So I can give folks in-house, but also if you're not a UU member, just so you're aware of how you might be able to get involved too. So our board of directors discussed it last month and we're very supportive. Our social justice team likewise, but kind of wanted to make sure we had these forums and gathered enough information for folks so that we knew we had a core group. So right now we're in the midst of trying to formulate a core group of folks who might be able to lead and coordinate this effort. Our board will meet next week, and I'm sure there'll be some conversation there to kind of give a final, like, yep, go forward. We know we've got enough interest and folks that we feel we can make this commitment. So I believe that that will likely happen soon, as well as this program being our monthly justice partner that we're splitting our plate with each Sunday and trying to engage folks in a variety of ways. If you're not a member of the UU Church, but you're interested in it, please email me or contact the church. We'd be glad to. We have a growing list of folks who have expressed interest from other communities that, you know, maybe their church or their community doesn't have enough folks to kind of organize as a sponsor on their own. But we're glad to say, come on in, we can do this together and kind of be the sponsor housing congregation for that. So I'm putting my email in the chat if you don't know it. It's revluke@urochmn.org, or you can just search Google Our Church or give us a call. They'll get you in touch with me as well if you're interested. Or of course you can contact Christina, I'm sure, at Catholic Charities, and we can stay connected that way too. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. Just so you know this, so this has been recorded. It's available and there's Christina's email. Available by request from our office. If you know of others who may have wanted to be here or couldn't, we'll share it as well. Anything else, Christina, you want to share before we'll draw our time to a close? Only 2 minutes after. That's pretty good for a church forum.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Whether this is a good fit for you or not, I do appreciate it. And Luke, I will get you those forms, so you have those well as your disposal, so that there's everything's ready for you guys if whoever's interested.
Awesome. Thank you. I've got just this, I'm a minister, so I always have closing words, but I want to share just this brief excerpt of a poem from Worcestershire. So take a breath in gratitude for this work that's happening and all these communities coming together. Worcestershire writes, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. Who would choose to spend days and nights in a truck unless the miles traveled meant something more than the journey?" So I'm hoping we be part of the place of providing haven, shelter, support, solidarity, love, justice for those who are seeking home in this space. Thank you to all of your communities for the work you're doing. Christina, thank you for your time and your work. We look forward to continuing that.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Be in touch
Have a
if
good
there's
night.
questions. Take good care. Bye-bye.